as we go along. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jorge Alvarez. I am the CMO of SESAMm, and we're very excited for the webinar today. We'll deep dive into greenwashing and reputational laundering practices and how to detect them using AI. So at SESAMm, we apply the AI technologies to detect controversies on ESG and general risks from the web. And using this technology, our ESG team embarked on a journey to analyze trends regarding greenwashing and reputational laundering, uncovering many interesting insights. So Sylvain Forte, who is the CEO of SESAMm, will walk us through our findings today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Sylvain.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thanks to the marketing team and to our team of analysts who prepared this study. So this presentation is actually a summarized version of a long study we did on greenwashing. We have an ebook that is coming that is around 30 pages with a lot of details and some of the charts that you will see today. So I really recommend it, and we'll share it with attendees very soon after this presentation. So let me just say a few words about SESAMm before we dive in. So as Jorge mentioned, we are a team of AI professionals and ESG professionals looking at analyzing ESG controversies and events across the web. We're a team of around 100 people. The company raised $50 million, and most of our team is based in France, but we also have offices in New York, London, Tokyo. And the work that we did today is really the work of our team of analysts and our ESG team that is using our data tools in order to drive specific indicators and to understand specific industries. So our team is led by our head of ESG, former Visual Moody's expert, and several analysts inside the team. So the goal for today's presentation is really to dive into greenwashing, and we'll actually start by providing a few definitions, because greenwashing, there are many different ways to see this, and it goes beyond just environmental topics, what we want to mention today. So the broader topic that we want to discuss today is actually reputational laundering. So it basically concealing unethical behaviors with positive actions. And greenwashing is kind of a subsegment there related to environmental practices. And typically greenwashing is related to misleading consumers specifically, and this can be investors, this can be people buying specific products for companies and using environmental subjects in order to drive new sales. There are other topics than greenwashing. So there's the broader topic of color washing. There's also social washing in general. So people basically use these types of strategy in order to create a positive public image, associating themselves with specific clauses, social clauses, ethical clauses, etc. And I want to give you a few examples on that. So for example, there's a term of purple washing, which is companies associating themselves with feminist causes without actually supporting women internally or having a gender parity, etc. internally. Or pink washing, also known as rainbow washing, which is the same thing but related to LGBT rights. So there are a lot of these different subtopics, like funny enough, there are even like things like sports washing, for example, which were in the range more of like just unethical marketing, but it's basically a term that was mentioned in the context of mining companies and energy companies associating themselves and sponsoring specific sports events in order to improve their image. One thing that is also important in this study is to mention that not every of these actions is intentional. So there's actually a big segment of unintentional greenwashing, which is due to these misleading claims basically being due to a lack of understanding or transparency. So lack of understanding, we all know that the regulatory frameworks around ESG are pretty complex. So it's understandable that in some cases, companies are not necessarily equipped to analyze it. And I want to highlight that just to open the topic, again, this takes a lot of forms. And recently, we analyzed a very interesting example with our partner, AT Finance. So AT Finance is a local rating agency in Europe, a very prestigious one. And they published an excellent report on our ESG controversy data, mentioning one thing that I found interesting in this context is that 65% of companies that are associated with major controversies and basically breaching the UN Global Compact are signatories of the UN Global Compact. And I think that's the same kind of topic that we have here, where companies are saying something and doing something different, making claims that they cannot support, And I found that this study particularly interesting from our partner, AT Finance. Right, so let's dive into what we can analyze from web data. So as you know, at SESAMm, we crunch billions of documents from the web. So basically premium news websites, public news, blogs, NGO websites, and the like, forums, in order to understand various topics related to ESG and risk. So here we aggregate all topics related to reputational laundering. So this includes greenwashing, but this also includes other topics such as social washing, for example. And the thing that we see is that this topic overall has increased on the web. So it's a more and more common topic, but there has been an explosion of these topics from 2021. So from 2021, they grew basically more than threefold in a very, very rapid manner. And so there's a lot of awareness that started during that time, and that was reinforced during that time. And at the same time, we have a look at lawsuits. And here we look at climate change related lawsuits. So not just greenwashing lawsuits, but also lawsuits related to environmental topics in general. So our team found a lot of lawsuits related to things like planned obsolescence practices, or climate change lawsuits, oil spills, wildfires, or there's a pretty large one that you have certainly heard of recently with PFAS contamination with 3M. Having to deal with a 10 billion settlement over contamination of water systems. And some of these events are really massive. So I think 3M, 10 billion settlement. Monsanto, there was a lawsuit for around 700 million in December 2022. And some of them are really smaller. Like Keurig, for example, had to pay a $3 million penalty for making misleading consumer claims, saying that their single-use pods were recyclable, which they were not. So there's really a variety of these. But as you can imagine, larger lawsuits tend to attract a lot more volume. They tend to be shared by major outlets. So they're going to be shared by Reuters and by Bloomberg, and then by many more local media and by various NGOs. So they tend to have even more importance in the dataset. So reputational laundering is a theme that is growing massively. Lawsuits associated to this are, logically speaking, also growing. And we can now go into the specificities of reputational laundering, and specifically the breakdown by type of washing. So this is basically a breakdown over time from 2015 to 2023, where we look at the percentage of mentions related to greenwashing versus other types of color washing, such as social washing, for example. And interestingly, up until 2020, the proportion was around 1/3 greenwashing and 2/3 other types of color washing, basically. And there was a massive shift from after 2021, where basically, and the way that we associate this is linked to COP27. So at the end of COP27, a call was made to really verify carbon and other environmental claims, and to basically show zero greenwashing tolerance. And this really maximized the number of mentions related to greenwashing, as there was a lot more scrutiny, including journalistic scrutiny. Journalists have a pretty big role to play in the industry, because they are some of the players that are actually discovering, investigating these topics, and allowing us to then report to stakeholders that are interested in these topics. And so from 2021, we saw a lot of these greenwashing claims emerging. So we'll discuss a big one related to DWS with, for example, the head of DWS stepping down after a greenwashing raid. In October 23, we had a big one related to Suncor being accused of greenwashing. And as you may have seen in the past few months, in September, we had several greenwashing cases against airlines in Europe. And these are just a few examples, but overall, there's really a trend toward a higher frequency of greenwashing mentions versus other types of color washing. And you'll see that there are some nuances to that. It doesn't mean that just greenwashing is increasing. It's really versus other types of color washing events. So let's dive even deeper. And here, this chart presents something slightly different. So the first thing that you have to see is this chart is not absolute basis. On the right, it's basically quarter-on-quarter growth, which is really important to note. And we analyze three different things. So first, we analyze mentions related to legal frameworks in reference to basically any green claims directive. So Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, EU taxonomy, green product certification, fair labeling, and many more of them. I'm sure you're familiar with many of these acronyms and frameworks. Then we have a look at regulation bodies, so whether governments or regulatory agencies, such as the UN Environmental Programme, the UNEP, or the Environmental Protection Agency. And finally, we have a look at that third topic that we have analyzed before, which is basically greenwashing, and greenwashing in the context of growth of mentions. So what do we observe? The first thing that we observe is that legal frameworks related to green claims in general are increasing in terms of visibility on the web. So from 2021 to 2020, from January 2021 to July 2022, we went from around 2.5 thousand mentions to more than 10,000. So that's really a massive shift. At the same time, what we observe is that the growth of greenwashing mentions is slightly decreasing during that period. And again, this is the growth, not the absolute number. So in the industry, greenwashing mentions are increasing, but their growth rate is actually slowing down over time. And that's pretty important. So there is a sort of anti-correlation that we observe. The more we talk about frameworks and the more formalized rules are for different kinds of market participants, the fewer this greenwashing topic is growing over time. And the way we interpret this is that the market is getting more and more educated. Some of these claims, again, are not intentional. And so we believe that the more clear rule they are in the market, the easier it gets to avoid these greenwashing claims. Right, so let's get to a chart that is a bit easier to interpret. So here we have a quick look at the percentage of mention related to reputational laundering in general, so greenwashing and others, in relation to the total of mentions for each industry. So here we look at industries such as food and drug retail, oil and gas, financials, telecommunications, and the like. And you have to imagine here that we have millions to billions of pieces of content for each of these industries. So these are huge, huge amounts of data. Anytime we mention any brand in the food and drug retail segment, we're going to have a mention there. And so there are a few different things that we observe. First, we see that the big players in terms of segments are food and drug, oil and gas, and financials. So these are the ones that are, from a percentage perspective, most touched by reputational laundering claims. Secondly, oil and gas and food and drug retail significantly increased. I would say even drastically increased in 2023. Like the increase is insane compared to other industries in terms of reputational laundering mentions. And food and drug retail, for example, the percentage of mentions related to these topics have increased by more than 3 times. And specifically, we tracked some of these claims, and these are typically linked to mislabeled eco-friendly product, for example, or misleading green initiative. Coca-Cola, Unilever, Amazon have all been accused of sometimes setting targets and not having real achievements, or setting goals that can be a bit misleading for consumers, making false claims and the like. And this has been very prominent in the industry. And in terms of the oil and gas sector, so we've seen a lot of greenwashing mentions in that sector, and it's logical. There is, when we analyze ESG controversies, environmental is really the category that has a real sector bias. So it's logical to find more environmental controversies in the oil and gas sector. But interestingly, we recently found more social washing elements in the oil and gas industry. For example, related to Total Energy in Uganda and Tanzania, failing to protect local communities, saying that they would, but failing to. So these kinds of topics are still emerging in the market, but we think that they're going to be more prominent all the time, and that oil and gas is not going to be limited to greenwashing claims in the future, but also to other types of social washing elements. One thing we found interesting and encouraging, and you'll see that here, is that in 2023, the percentage of mentions related to social washing in general, all categories considered, has decreased compared to 2022. And this is actually very a positive element. And of course, there are still greenwashing topics emerging, some of them ongoing, like Goldman Sachs facing an SEC probe for ESG funds, and some of these being resolved. So sometimes these greenwashing lawsuits and claims and investigations, they help companies solve issues such as HSBC that is announcing that they will stop funding new oil and gas fields because of greenwashing criticism. And so these can also have positive effects. So the food and drug retail industry was a bit of a surprise for us. And the very positive aspect from our perspective was this decrease in the percentage of mention in the financial industry. And again, there is a link with emerging regulations and framework and the increase or decrease in mentions. And as we all know, the financial industry is now heavily regulated and has a lot of different frameworks that they can use. Right, so not everything is good in the financial industry. And what we wanted to show today, and without judging or making any claims, is simply a look at the percentage of mentions of more than 140 different financial institutions and looking at any greenwashing mentions and what is the percentage of mentions compared to the total volume of mention for each company. So you can think of it as what is the reputational impact of greenwashing as a percentage of the total reputation of the company for each of these groups. You'll note that we didn't just do the negative side. We also had a look at positive impact initiatives. And you'll see later that we have that same list, but the other way around. So the names on the top of the list are not big surprises. We mentioned DWS. So this has been a very public controversy, so it's no surprise. We see some interesting names on the list, such as BlackRock, for example, that has been accused of greenwashing for investing in fossil fuels. Same for JP Morgan, specifically related to their fossil fuel investment policies, and HSBC for false advertising on green claims. So very big names making that list, basically, with various kinds of accusations. And now let's have a look at a specific topic. So we mentioned DWS, and we wanted just to dive in. This is a very well-known event, but we think it's interesting just as a way to understand the timeline and also how greenwashing has an impact on the overall reputation of an asset manager. So just to recap the story, the German asset manager DWS is under the umbrella of Deutsche Bank, and it was involved in severe greenwashing allegations from the end of 2021. Their offices were searched in May 2022. So that's actually what created a lot of journalistic noise, is the moment where the offices were searched by local authorities, and ultimately led to the resignation of DWS chief in June 2022, and finally to a $25 million fine recently in September 23. So you can see some spikes that typically relate to these specific events that are being discussed and reshared across specific periods. So this is a visual representation. And what I personally found very interesting is how significant the correlation is between greenwashing events here and total volumes of data related to DWS. So you can see how much impact greenwashing has on the overall mentions of an entire company and on their overall reputation. Right, so to take the flip side of it, we also wanted to analyze positive mentions. And here there is something, again, relatively positive for the fashion industry, and which was not obvious when we started this study, is that if you look at the percentages of data, these are an order of magnitude higher than for the negative side. So positive initiatives in terms of public perception completely dwarf those of negative impacts, greenwashing, and color washing elements in general. So people basically care a bit more about the positive side, a lot more actually about the positive side than the negative side. And despite the fact that we hear a lot about negative events, greenwashing, accusations, etc., many of the most interesting publications relate to positive impact stories. And so the company making the top of the list here is Brookfield Asset Management, followed by other firms such as EQT, Berkshire, S&P, Legal & General, and others. And we specifically dived into the topics related to Brookfield to understand why this firm was so much associated with environmental initiatives. And so what we found is that Brookfield has launched a $7 billion global energy transition fund. So more on their business side, they are launching specific projects that are of interest. They're also launching a sustainable neighborhood project in Texas. They have a social and environmental commitment to plant thousands of trees. So basically more working with NGOs, etc. on that. And even in their internal organization, which we found interesting, they have a transition to zero emission electricity in their offices. And these are slightly less common than launching a specific impact fund, for example. But from a public perception, they are also well received and they make some noise basically on the web. So these environmental initiatives are interesting, not just when they relate to financial investment, but also when they relate to internal initiatives. And for Brookfield, it is so significant that at some point from September 2022, basically, these environmental initiatives represent more than 50% of the total volume of data on the entire web related to Brookfield Asset Management. So again, here the firm is really driven in terms of e-reputation by its environmental initiative. And so it can have a very massive impact. And another thing that we find interesting on this chart, on this table, is you can see BlackRock again, actually. And BlackRock there is a bit of a nuanced view on BlackRock where it has both greenwashing accusation and also where it's rewarded from a public perspective for positive efforts. So it's interesting to see that a firm can make it to both sides of the list. And from a methodology perspective, what's very important for us at SESAMm is when we provide data, we have two very separate sets of data, one related to ESG controversies, negative side, one related to positive impact, positive side. And we cannot merge the two for one obvious reason, is that otherwise potential negative events, greenwashing events, etc., attempts would potentially be merged or offset by positive mentions. And so that's one thing that we specifically want to avoid. So that's why you can find BlackRock on both lists, and that one positive aspect will not balance a negative element. So we see some other companies. I mentioned EQT, Berkshire, Standard & Poor's, Aviva, DBS, AGS, and others. And for many of them, it's related either to the launch of financial products or, as we mentioned before, to specific internal initiatives. As a conclusion, I wanted to highlight a few things before we move to Q&A. So the things that our team found most impactful in this study is, first, there is hope, and there are really some very positive things, especially in the financial industry. Positive ESG initiatives overshadow negative impact. So this is why it's so important to separate the two. But overall, there is an order of magnitude in terms of positive perception versus negative perception. And this is a good thing. Real sustainable actions are implemented, and most of them do not relate to greenwashing claims. So most of them are actual actions and things that companies implement. So we see that some companies really are front runners in the field, such as Brookfield Asset Management, such as EQT and other firms, and really aim to drive meaningful change. And we saw that percentages of mentions related to greenwashing and color washing in general in the financial industry decreased in 2023. So the battle is not necessarily won, but there are some really encouraging elements. And it seems that regulatory bodies and different frameworks have a really positive aspect on that. Our role at SESAMm is to measure this, and we strongly believe that there is a need for advanced analytical tools in order to solve these issues, in order to measure impact, in order to understand how much a firm is doing in the positive direction and in the negative direction, and to also be able to monitor these greenwashing accusations and how they end up with specific lawsuits, fines paid, etc. Over time. So as you know, at SESAMm, we provide that type of data, and we would love to have a conversation. So feel free to reach out to info@sesamm.com if you'd like to learn more. But first, I will now address, hopefully, any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvain, for these great insights. So we're going to start the Q&A session, as you said. For everyone in the audience who want to ask a question, please type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll address as many as we can. We already have a couple from the audience, so we're going to start with those. So first question, how common is it to detect signs of potential ESG scandals on the web using AI? And how does that differ from Google Alerts?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty common question. So it's really related to early warnings. On greenwashing, there are different elements. So on greenwashing, one thing that we can do is use anomalies in terms of positive mentions to have some forewarning of companies potentially communicating in a way that is overly positive. So that's one thing that is pretty interesting. In addition to that, at SESAMm, we have an enormous amount of data, way beyond what is covered just by public search engines. So we have access to individual NGO websites, we have access to forum, we have access to a specific premium news under paywall, which we get access through licensed partnership. And so we're able to search a lot more content and very local content in local language. So if you set up a Google Alert to track a specific company, at SESAMm, we actually have all of the subsidiaries in the local language, and we're going to perform sentiment analysis and ESG analysis in each of these local languages. So there are a good number of cases where we're able to identify these controversies slightly in advance before they hit mainstream media, because we have some exclusive data sources like this, which are much more local and which we can get access to.
Thank you, Sylvain. There's another question from the audience. So appreciate you sharing these insights and what was developed from SESAMm and the platform. Sorry. Would you mind sharing any thoughts on how you measure the severity of a greenwashing event for a given firm? And do such considerations feed into ESG asset allocation techniques that you are working on?
It's a good topic. We take a slightly more general approach to that. So we have a score called the intensity score at SESAMm, which is basically a proxy for severity of a controversy, whatever the type of controversies. And greenwashing is one type of controversy. We track around 100 different events, and greenwashing is one of these 100 different events that we track. This intensity score is based on several different factors. So we're going to say, for example, how negative is the content? How many times has it been reshared in the industry? What is the authority of the individual sources that are sharing the content? As you can imagine, content shared by a massive news outlet and a very well-recognized media is likely to have more impact on the company than a very local controversy. So we identify these topics. And of course, there are industry specifics and certain kind of topics like child labor, for example, that can just have massive impact. And then based on that, we rank each event on a scale from 1 to 5. And usually we alert users from an intensity score of 3. So they receive an email alert, but we can set different parameters on that. So it's a sort of proxy for severity, which is automated, and which we can deploy on any company, including private firms, small companies, and the like.
Thank you, Sylvain. Another question. Public companies are usually talked about on the web, so those scandals are widely known. But how about smaller private companies? Can AI detect those as well?
Sure. So here, indeed, we focus mostly in the examples on large companies, but a big competitive advantage of SESAMm is this ability to track private firms. Most of our clients are actually private equity firms and private debt funds. And the reason for that is that we have so much underlying data. So we have around 20 billion pieces of content, more than 4 million sources, that we are able to identify controversies on very small and local companies, so SMEs typically. And we do this for a lot of our clients, from Carlyle to Warburg, or even banks tracking their suppliers, for example, like Crédit Mutuel Arca. So it can be very, very small firms that we track with our system. And that's due to the quantity of data, the ability to track local content, and then the ability to analyze this content in the local language. So if you have a controversy based on a supplier in Japan, we actually have specific algorithms to process Japanese language and to raise alerts based on that, which is really unique.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ivan. That was the last question from the audience. Let me take a look. Yeah, I don't see any other question. So thank you all for your participation in today's webinar, and special thanks for Sylvain and the research team at SESAMm for their insights. So we really hope this has been a valuable session for you. And as Sylvain said, if you're interested in learning more about SESAMm, you can visit our website, sesamm.com, with a double M. You can also send us an email to info@sesamm.com, and you can find a lot of resources on the website for that. So for those who would like to learn more about the topic, we'll also release the ebook that is at the base of this webinar tomorrow. And you're gonna find a lot more details on the topic. And we'll also send a replay of the webinar to everyone who attended. So you'll be receiving that soon in your email. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much again for joining us. And again, thank you, Sylvain. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank our marketing team. These webinars are a lot of work. So thanks, Jorge and the whole team, and also our research team, Mehe, Ahmed, and everyone who worked on that. It's a great ebook. I really recommend it. I had a lot of fun reading it, learning about these topics, and to present that today. So thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thank you.